From the studio of Blackwater Media in the great city of Atlanta, I'm Dr. William Lester. Welcome to Blackwater Media's North American Monsters Files. The telling of scary stories around a campfire is a tradition that is likely nearly as old as mankind itself. While tales of ghosts, goblins, and murderous psychopaths can rattle the cage of nearly anyone, what better subject for a campfire story could there be than a cannibalistic and murderous Sasquatch? The story of a haunted house might be creepy, but unless you're actually staying in the house in question, it is easily and quickly forgotten once the marshmallows and chocolate and graham crackers appear at the fire. Tales of a creature many people regard as being real, stalking the very woods in which you've pitched your tent, however, are not always so easy to put aside. One such terrifying tale is the story of a Bigfoot war that allegedly took place in eastern Oklahoma during the mid-1850s. The story of the Leflore County Bigfoot War is one that I've heard bits and pieces of through the years. So let's take a look at the story and see what we can find out. It's said that in or around 1855, a band of Choctaws in what is now Leflore County and farmers in what is now Arkansas were experiencing some terrifying events. It all began in a rather benign way when the theft of vegetables, a few head of livestock, and other foodstuff by stealthy bandits in the night. The thieves were cagey, quiet, and never seen. They were also smart, as somehow they never ventured into Choctaw encampments on the nights when the watchman was in place. Neither did the bandits ever fall into the trap set for them by farmers outside of Indian territory. Those charged with finding and capturing these marauders began to develop a begrudging respect for the wiliness of their adversaries as time went by and the petty thefts continued. While the thefts were annoying and did cause some hardships, neither the Choctaw or the neighboring Anglo farmers were afraid of the food bandits. However, things changed once women and children began to go missing. Spurred by reports of these kidnappings, a group of 30 Choctaw cavalrymen were organized to hunt down the abductors. The group was led by Joshua Leflore, a man of mixed Choctaw and French blood who was deeply respected by his fellow tribesmen. Also joining the search party was a Choctaw warrior named Hamas Tubby and his 6 sons. The Tubbies were huge men, all approaching 7 feet in height and weighing in at more than 300 pounds each, and were regarded as fierce warriors and expert horsemen. The Tubbies were so effective in mounted warfare that despite their massive size, they became known as the Light Horsemen. This contingent of searchers, armed to the teeth, set out into the region known today as the McCurtain County Wilderness Area to search for the kidnappers. After riding all day, the searchers finally arrived in the area where they believed the bandits to be hiding. Leflore brought his troops to a halt, stood up in his stirrups, and surveyed the area with a spyglass. It is unclear exactly what Leflore saw, but whatever it was, he ordered his men to charge toward a stand of pines, roughly 500 yards distant. Leflore and the Tubby men led the attack. As the troops closed the distance between themselves and the stand of pines where the kidnappers were thought to be hiding, they were assaulted by a tremendous stench, the unmistakable odor of decay and decomposition. The horses of most of the men began to buck and rear, tossing their riders. Only the mounts of Leflore and the Tubby men were disciplined enough to remain composed, allowing the 8 men to continue through the pines. As the men cleared the small wooded patch, they came upon a large earthen mound. Scattered across the mound were the bodies of children and women in various stages of decomposition. Leflore and the Tubbies caught a glimpse of a number of the murderers fleeing into the tree line on the opposite side of the mound. Only 3 of the killers stood their ground to meet the charge of the Light Horsemen. It was at this time that the cavalrymen realized they were not going up against any human foe. Rather, standing before them, snarling and beating their chests, were 3 huge, hairy-covered creatures. Despite what must have been a shocking sight, LaFleur drew his pistol and saber, spurred his mount, and charged. As LaFleur approached the nearest ape, it took a mighty swipe and struck his horse in the head, killing it instantly. LaFleur managed to roll off the falling horse, quickly jumping to his feet, and fired multiple shots into the chest of the creature. Once his pistol was empty, LaFleur attacked the ape with his saber, opening up gaping wounds on the animal, which roared in rage and pain. LaFleur's assault on the creature was so quick, and the shock of seeing hair-covered monsters so great, that the tubby men hesitated, completely stupefied, before entering the fray. This delay allowed one of the other 2 apes to get behind LaFleur, who was intensely focused on the ape he had engaged. The second beast grabbed LaFleur's head with 2 huge hands and ripped it from his shoulders. The horrible sight jolted the tubby warriors into action, and they opened fire on the 3 Sasquatches with 50 caliber Sharps buffalo rifles. 2 of the beasts were killed instantly, dropping in their tracks. The third creature was wounded but turned and fled till the lethal shot could be fired. Robert Tubby, only 18 years old but already 6'11" and well over 300 pounds, spurred his horse, ran down the injured ape, and dispatched him with his hunting knife. As the rest of the troop, after gathering their panicked horses, joined them, the light horsemen surveyed the area. The bodies of dead women and children, mostly partially devoured, littered the area. The smell of decay, along with the terrible odor of the beast's feces, caused many of the men to vomit. After composing themselves, the men gathered the remains of the unfortunate women and children and buried them. They also buried their leader, Joshua LaFleur. As for the 3 ape-like monsters, their bodies were placed upon a huge bonfire and burned. Their hellish task complete, the Choctaw warriors returned to Tuskahoma, where it's said that the mighty Tubby men were plagued by terrible nightmares for years afterward. It's one hell of a story, but is any of it true? We do know that the Tubbies existed, so too did a man named Joshua LaFleur. You won't find any official documents that LaFleur died in battle. In fact, outside of the realm of folklore, there's virtually no information to establish that the LaFleur County Bigfoot War took place at all. Having said that, it is possible that the LaFleur County incident was actually based on a real event that took place in a different location. According to a Bigfoot researcher named Jim King, the answer might be yes. King believes the LaFleur County story is based on an event that took place much farther west in Kiowa territory, an event related to him by an Indian elder. According to the story, Kiowa women were placed in a special teepee or tent on the edge of the camp when they started their menstrual cycle. The women stayed there being tended to only by older women until their cycle was complete. The elder told King that women were considered unclean during their cycles, and Kiowa warriors were not only forbidden any physical contact with females during this time, they were not allowed to even look upon them. This seems a bit harsh, of course, but it's not too different than the way many cultures treated menstruating women in the past. The elder said that once long ago there had been trouble with ape-like creatures who were attracted by the scent and pheromones emanating from the tent where the menstruating women were housed. Since the tent was on the edge of the encampment, it proved to be an easy target for renegade apes who were said to have entered and carried off women on several occasions. To make a long story short, the Kiowa leadership decided that this was unacceptable and put together a group of warriors to hunt down the kidnappers. The searchers did manage to track an ape back to its lair and killed not only it, but the entire family unit. Could the LaFleur County story have its roots in the tale told to Jim King by the Kiowa elder? Is there any truth at all, even the smallest grains, in either tale? I've heard that many put their faith in the LaFleur County version simply due to the name of the unfortunate Joshua LaFleur. They wouldn't have named the county after him if it wasn't true, and other similar statements abound. I, however, have not been able to find anything saying LaFleur County was named after Joshua LaFleur. According to the Oklahoma Historical Society website, the name honors the prominent LaFleur family of the Choctaw Nation. Could Joshua LaFleur have been one of the prominent LaFleur family? It's certainly possible, but there does not seem to be any documentation singling out Joshua or his actions as the reason for the naming of the county. The story of the LaFleur County Bigfoot War, even if totally fictional, does seem to point to the fact that enormous hair-covered ape-like animals have been thought to reside in the region for a very long time, a time long before the Patterson-Gimlin film brought Bigfoot into America's consciousness. Add to this the beliefs of many other Native American tribes from across the North American continent, who have long told stories of these creatures snatching women and children, and the anecdotal evidence stack grows taller. Truth be told, the idea of child or a woman snatching Sasquatches continues to thrill, terrify, and enthrall us to this very day. It may very well be that the tale of the LaFleur County Bigfoot War was inspired by actual less dramatic events, like the Ape Canyon incident. Over the years, such a story would be embellished and grow to mythic proportions. It is all but inevitable, as a good scary story is irresistible. Don't be too hard on those who might have added to the original facts. After all, we all know that the most frightening types of campfire stories will always have one thing in common. They could really happen. Converse, Texas is not the kind of place one would normally associate with a monster sighting. The town, while small, it encompasses only 6.3 square miles, is now densely populated and heavily developed. Sitting only 15 miles to the northeast of downtown San Antonio, it has become hard to discern where Converse ends and the Alamo City begins. It's known for many things these days: great Mexican food, the Judson High School Rockets football team, and Randolph Air Force Base, to name a few. Converse, however, was not always so developed and civilized. Like most of Bexar County, it was once not much more than arid plains, rocks, cactus, and chaparral scrubland. Such lonesome country often holds secrets. The area that was to become Converse is no exception. It's said that back in the mid to late 1800s, a rancher moved onto a plot of land near what is now Converse. The man was a rugged sort who had grown up in true pioneer fashion. Some versions of the tale suggest he was a military combat veteran who moved to the area in an effort to put the horrors of the Civil War behind him and live out his days quietly on the South Texas plains. This man had a son who was something of a disappointment to him. The boy was frail, bookish, and preferred studying to wrangling and hunting. This frustrated the old rancher to no end, and he decided to, quote, make a man out of the boy. To this end, the rancher decided to send his son out hunting. He hoped that the boy would take a liking to the sport and, after making his first kill, would prefer the more manly activity of hunting to that of reading and studying all day. The old man put a long gun in the boy's hands and instructed him to go out and shoot a deer. The family needed meat after all. He directed the boy to hunt a heavily wooded area along a creek called Skull Crossing. The boy was reluctant at first and resisted. One way or the other, he was finally coerced into going. The old rancher watched with high hopes as his son walked away from the homestead toward the woods. The old man would soon be disappointed, however, as his son returned a few hours later empty-handed. When chastised for returning without any game, the boy told his father that he left the area out of fear, as he had spotted and been stalked by a monster resembling a werewolf. The father immediately dismissed this wild story and cajoled his son into returning to the area to finish the hunt. The boy did not want to go, but his father left him no choice. Trembling and fearful, the boy trudged back out to the ominously named area of Skull Crossing. Little did the old rancher know, it would be the last time he would see his son alive. Hours passed, and darkness began to fall. The old man, the story goes, began to worry and have second thoughts about sending his inexperienced son out into the woods alone. While he hoped the reason the boy had not returned was because he had yet to make a kill, he began to have a sinking feeling deep in his gut that something was wrong. Deciding not to wait any longer, the rancher rounded up some neighbors and they made their way toward the wooded area near Skull Crossing in search of the boy. What they found upon arriving there is the stuff of nightmares. The search party happened upon a monstrous, hairy creature hunched over the body of the rancher's son. The beast was in the act of ravenously devouring the boy when discovered. The men got off a few shots at the monster, but it bounded away at lightning speed. The werewolf, as it was dubbed, was described as standing between 8 and 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair or fur. Members of the search party described it as being some kind of unholy combination between a wolf and a man. The old rancher was understandably devastated by the death of his boy. He blamed himself for not believing his son's story and believed he sent him out to his doom by forcing him to return to Skull Crossing to complete his hunt. The versions of the tale I've generally heard say that the rancher died shortly thereafter. Some versions say he had become reclusive, refused to eat, and wasted away. Others say that he committed suicide by setting fire to his own home and burning up. Either way, it was a sad end all the way around. Did this event actually occur? You won't find any old newspaper accounts documenting the incident. I've looked and came up empty. Somehow, though, the tale has lived on for more than a century. Should the story be dismissed as an old campfire story? A myth? I'm not so sure. There are similar stories involving werewolves and other hairy-covered monsters that live on in the folklore of the region. The story of the Wild Woman of the Navidad, Bear King of Marble Falls, the legend behind Woman Hollering Creek, the Hairy Man of Round Rock, and the mysterious limestone carving dubbed the Cleo Face, all allude to old tales of beasts of similar appearance. Of course, much folklore has a basis in truth. It's possible that the legend of the converse werewolf has its genesis in an actual event. Some believe that if a young boy was killed near Skull Crossing, it was likely the result of an attack by an animal, much more mundane than a werewolf. That's fair enough, but it fails to take into account the description given by the men who spied the beast. The animal was described as bipedal, covered in hair, 8 to 9 feet tall, and lightning fast. Whatever the animal was, it was not a mundane member of the local fauna. In fact, the description attributed to the animal, if given today, would immediately bring to mind images of what is now known as Dogman, or even the Sasquatch. Many Bigfoot enthusiasts seek to dismiss the idea that the converse werewolf might have been a wood ape. No doubt this is because of the alleged death of a human being at the hands of the said beast. Others are not so quick to dismiss the possibility that a Sasquatch is the villain behind the legend. Most who entertain the idea that the North American wood apes might exist speculate that their diet is likely similar to that of black bears. Black bears do subsist mainly on plant matter, berries, roots, and nuts, to name just a few. Black bears also indulge in eating insects, grubs, birds, and mammals when the opportunity presents itself. While rare, black bears do occasionally hunt humans for the express purpose of devouring them. If wood apes exist, and if their diet is indeed similar to that of black bears, then it would not be out of the realm of possibility that a hungry Sasquatch might take advantage of a situation where there was an easy meal to be had. Admittedly, this is contrary to the behavior most often reported by witnesses who claim to have seen Bigfoot. Most witnesses report that these creatures, once they realize they've been spotted, simply retreat back into the forest and make themselves scarce. It must be acknowledged, though, that tales of cannibalism and abductions have been associated with these creatures since time immemorial. Many Native Americans feared Sasquatches and believed they would snatch a wayward member of the tribe when given the opportunity. One simply cannot, in my view, use ancient Native American tales as supporting evidence that the Sasquatch is real, while ignoring the other details of the legend. People continue to disappear in the wild places of North America to this day, some under very odd circumstances. Many are never found. Most, no doubt, simply get lost and die of exposure, dehydration, etc. Others are likely the victims of foul play, of the very human variety. Could a small minority of the missing be victims of abduction at the hands of Sasquatch? The legendary accounts of Albert Osman, Mushalat Harry, along with the First Nations legends, suggests it's at least a possibility. The story of the converse werewolf is slowly fading away now. Sophisticated suburbanites have little time for such tales. As the years pass, fewer and fewer South Texans hear of the legend. Even those who have heard the story tend to dismiss it as folklore. It is a scary story to be told around a campfire or at Halloween, and nothing more. To those of us who pursue these creatures and venture into the deepest forests and remote places in North America, the story has a different meaning. It's a cautionary tale. Fact or fiction, it reminds us to take nothing for granted, to always be careful and aware of our surroundings. You might well suppose that we'll never really know what, if anything, happened at Skull Crossing all those years ago. And I'd be inclined to agree with you. Did a young boy really die? Did a grief-stricken and guilt-ridden father join his son in death soon thereafter? The truth, I'm afraid, has been buried along with the early residents of Bexar County. Maybe it's best it remains there. If you're from the Lone Star State, then you know that Davy Crockett is an important figure in Texas history. Although a native of Tennessee, Crockett left his home state after serving as a member of Congress when another individual was voted into his seat. This spawned his famous quote, "You all may go to hell, but I'm going to Texas." Although initially attracted to Texas by the allure of cheap land and natural resources, upon arriving, Crockett had many adventures which eventually led to him to advocate for Texas independence. He fought for the Texas Army in its quest to become its own nation free from the rule of Mexico, and Crockett famously died defending the Alamo. An avid outdoorsman, Crockett is mythologized for many of his skills as a woodsman, such as killing a bear with a knife when he was only 3 years old and wearing a coonskin cap. While some of these feats might be fantasies, there's plenty of evidence in Crockett's own journals and correspondence with friends and family that document his skill in the wild. One encounter that you may not know about is the time that Crockett allegedly came face to face with a Bigfoot. Upon traveling into the interior of Texas in what is close to the national forest that's named after him, Crockett wrote in a letter to his brother-in-law about an encounter he had with a creature that he described as the shape and shade of a large ape man. I want to now share with you the contents of Crockett's letter. William and I were pushing through some thicket, clearing the way when I sat down to mop my brow. I sat for a spell watching as Williams made his good and fine progress. I removed my boots and sat with my rations, thinking the afternoon a fine time to lunch. As the birds whistled and chirped, and I ate my small and meager ration, I tapped my axe upon the opposite end of a fallen tree I rested upon. The letter continues. Whether it was the axe's disturbance or possibly the heat of the sun which caused an apparition to slowly form in front of my eyes, I do not know. As a Christian man, I swear to you, Abe, that what spirit came upon me was the shape and shade of a large ape-man, the likes we might expect among the more bellicose and hostile Indian tribes in the territories. The shade formed into the most deformed and ugly countenance, covered in wild hair, with small and needling eyes, large broken rows of teeth, and the height of 3 foundlings. I spit upon the ground the bread I was eating. Crockett continues. The monster then addressed a warning to me. Abner, it told me to return from Texas, to flee this fort, and to abandon this lost cause. When I began to question this, the creature spread upon the wind like the morning steam swirls off a frog pond. I swear to you, Abner, that whatever meat or sausage disagreed with me that afternoon, I swore off all beef and hog for a day or so afterward. Less than 6 months after the writing of this letter, Crockett was killed at the Alamo with approximately 190 others. Santa Anna's army swept north and east in an attempt to snuff out the Texas Revolution. That being the case, no clarification on the information in the letter was ever given. Most historians feel that the account in the letter was just an attempt by Crockett to entertain his brother-in-law. Some, however, feel differently. Many point to the fact that Crockett swore his account was true not once, but twice in the letter. They also point to how Crockett had insisted on changing the wording of the Oath of Allegiance as evidence that he took his honor seriously. The wording changed in the oath included the addition of the word Republican before the word government. That way, Crockett would have been obliged to defend a rogue government run by a non-elected dictator. It is this very change in the agreement that allowed Crockett to fight against Santa Anna with a clear conscience. Would Crockett have sworn the tale was true in writing if it didn't occur? Now, the entire matter of the creature apparition appearing and verbalizing a warning to Crockett is about as bizarre an incident as I've ever come across. Certainly the description of the creature given by Crockett matches the classic description of a wood ape or Sasquatch. The ugly countenance, covering of wild hair, and the small needling eyes described all sound familiar. So does the estimated height of 3 foundlings. Now, while there's no exact height of a foundling, a small abandoned child, most agree a safe estimate for this description would be somewhere between 7 and 8 feet. But that's where the similarities between Crockett's creature and credible modern Bigfoot accounts end. The claim of Crockett that the creature spoke to him and actually warned him to leave Texas is utterly unprecedented. I don't even know what to say about it. Crockett's description of how the apparition slowly formed and later disappeared, like the morning steam off a frog pond, makes the entire incident seem more likely to have been a lucid dream or hallucination of some kind. Again, it's all very strange. What did David Crockett see in the woods near Nacogdoches in 1836? The likelihood is that we will never know. Something telling, however, is how few people have heard of this account. So many of Crockett's feats and experiences have been trumpeted and blown up to mythic proportions through the years that it seems strange that this tale has fallen between the cracks and remains largely untold today. Having said that, though, maybe it isn't so strange after all. Americans like their heroes, especially those in the distant past, to be without blemish, perfect images chiseled into marble. These heroes, men like Crockett, are revered to this very day and held up as icons. The legacy of such a man might be tarnished if such a story leaked out and became well known. Better to dismiss the tale as nothing more than a bit of yarn spinning on the part of good old Davy, than to attempt to come to grips with the possibility that something genuinely strange happened in the deep woods of East Texas in 1836. Something very strange indeed. But still, there's something else here that deserves consideration. The creature we've come to call Bigfoot is undoubtedly a flesh and blood creature. After all, it leaves footprints, captures prey for food, and has been seen eating. There are even reports of the creature being injured and perhaps even killed by gunshots. However, none of this precludes the possibility of the existence of other types of beings, entities if you will, that have the ability to manifest and take on the likeness of a creature like Bigfoot. Such a being would have an etheric nature, appearing and vanishing at will, and perhaps even communicating telepathically. If Crockett's encounter is to be taken at face value, it is more likely that it was this type of being that he faced that day so long ago. Something to think about. Did a Bigfoot really attack a party of men in the Okefenokee Swamp in 1829? Or was it all a tall tale? The answer to those questions, quite honestly, may never be known. But the story is one of many that add to the mystery of the swamp. The tale originated near the south end of Ware County, where the line that divides Georgia from Florida passes through the Okefenokee. In 1829, the first white settlers were just pushing into the fringes of the swamp. Surrounded by the stunning beauty of the swamp, they quickly picked up on an Indian legend that held a mysterious race of people lived on an island deep in the wilderness. So far as is known, another related account first appeared in print in 1806 in Jedediah Morse's book, Geography Made Easy. In his section on Georgia, Morse repeated a legend that a group of Indian hunters had gone into the swamp and become lost. When they were in a desperate condition, a party of the most beautiful women they'd ever seen came out to their rescue. Here's a quote from Morse's book. They being lost in inextricable swamps and bogs and on the point of perishing, were unexpectedly relieved by a company of beautiful women, whom they called daughters of the sun, who kindly gave them such provisions as they had with them, consisting of fruit and corn cakes. The tale, as repeated by Morse, continued with the women warning the hunters to flee as fast as possible to their own country, because their husbands were fierce men and cruel to strangers. These men of the swamp were said by the Creek Indians to be of gigantic stature and both cruel and warlike. The winter of 1828-1829 was extremely dry, and two men living on the edges of the swamp decided to explore as deep into it as they could. Accompanied by a boy, they went into the Okefenokee and over a course of 2 weeks continued to penetrate deeper and deeper into it. As they explored the very heart of the swamp, they made a startling discovery of gigantic footprints. The length of the foot was 18 and the breadth 9 inches. The monster, from every appearance, must have moved forward in an easy or hesitating gait, his stride from heel to toe being a trifle over 6 feet. This is what was printed in the Milledgeville, Georgia Statesman newspaper, January 1829. Published again in the Connecticut Sentinel, February 9, 1829. The men, as newspapers of the time noted, had, quote, seen enough. Ending their expedition and retreating out of the swamp, they related to their friends and neighbors what they'd seen. Of course, the story excited the curiosity of a party of hunters who lived just across the Florida line. 9 in number, they went into the swamps to find the mysterious giant, and they were guided by one of those members of the original party. Quote, following for some days the direction of their guide, they came at length upon the track first discovered, some vestiges of which were still remaining. Pursuing these traces several days longer, they came to a halt on a little eminence and determined to pitch their camp and refresh themselves for the day. The expedition was described in detail in newspaper reports published in February 1829. Those accounts indicated that as the hunters were discharging their guns to reload them with fresh powder for the night, a wild animal charged their camp. Here are actual details from the newspaper report. The next minute he was full in their view, advancing upon them with a terrible look and ferocious countenance. Our little band instinctively gathered close in a body and presented their rifles. The huge being, nothing daunted, bounded upon his victims, and in the same instant received the contents of 7 rifles. The fight, however, did not end there. He did not fall alone, as the newspaper reported. nor until he had glutted his wrath with the death of 5 of them, which he effectively by wringing the head from the body. Writhing and exhausted, at length he fell, with his hapless prey beneath his grasp. As the creature lay dying on the ground, writhing and sometimes roaring, the men who survived the attack gathered round to make a closer inspection. The creature was found to measure 13 feet from head to toe, and its breadth and volume of just proportions. Immediately fearful that the dying monster's cries might attract others of its kind, the hunters fled the swamp. The men who died in the battle with the creature were left lying where they'd fallen. It's a damn remarkable story, but could it be true? The honest answer is that no one knows. The newspaper correspondent who reported it wrote that people living in Ware County on the margins of the Okefenokee Swamp clearly believed it. Either way, the story of the 1829 attack was one of the earliest written accounts of the creature we know today as Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Sightings of some kind of large creature in the swamp and discoveries of large footprints continue to be reported in that area to this very day.
Sheer stark terror grips you in underwater 3D in Creature from the Black Lagoon.
The most terrifying monster of the ages rises from the sea, raging with pent-up passions,
Making every man his mortal enemy, every woman's beauty his prey.
Creature from the Black Lagoon in 3D, starring Richard Carlson and Julie Adams.
Every horrifying scene leaps out of the screen right at you.
A Universal re-release, rated G.
The areas in and around Columbus, Georgia have a rich history. And with this rich history, the city of Columbus is also home to a great number of ghost stories. The stories continue outside of the city limits in the surrounding communities. Those stories include one that is not a ghost story, but more of a legend that seems like something out of a late-night horror movie, and one of the most popular legends in the state of Georgia. And it has to do with a werewolf in neighboring Talbot County. Talbot County is a small community located to the east of Columbus. The county is home to a little more than 6,200 residents and a rather quiet place for the most part. One year, parts of the county were devastated when a powerful tornado tore through areas of the county, including the city of Talbotton. However, more than a century ago, a story came out of Talbot County that seems as though it was the inspiration for a nightmare. The Burt family was a very prominent and well-off family in Talbot County. The family had several children and lived in a home in the Pleasant Hill area located near Talbotton. The children included one daughter by the name of Emily Isabella Burt. Emily's father died at the age of 37, and her mother inherited the family's 300-acre estate. Shortly after the death of her father, Emily's mother sent her to boarding school in Paris. The legend says that while in Europe, Emily contracted lycanthropy, a supernatural transformation of a person into a wolf. Or to some, a mental disorder where a person has a delusion of being an animal, usually a wolf. After attending boarding school, Emily returned to Georgia. When she returned, her behavior was oddly different. People said that Emily was always sickly and distant. She often stared off into space and was known to sleepwalk. Shortly after her return to Talbot County, there was a rash of killing and slaughtering of wildlife, including sheep. Many of the residents believed that a wolf was to blame for those deaths. One night, local residents formed a posse and armed themselves to seek and hunt down the wolf responsible for the killings. According to the legend, an elderly man in the area who was a native of Eastern Europe told the members of the posse to melt down anything silver. They weren't dealing with a regular wolf. They were dealing with a werewolf. The posse, armed with their silver bullets, descended into the countryside, seeking the beast. The story says that one of the members of the posse came across the wolf, and it was indeed a werewolf. The hunter shot the werewolf, wounding it, and the wolf fled into the woods and escaped the posse. Oddly, the legend says that the next day, Emily's mother found her suffering from a gunshot wound. A local doctor treated Emily's wound, and shortly after, her mother sent her back to Europe for treatment of lycanthropy by a specialist. The legend says once Emily was shipped off to Europe, the killings of livestock stopped in Talbot County. After an undisclosed amount of time in Europe, Emily is said to have returned to Georgia and was cured of the disorder she suffered from. She lived her life out and became a respected member of the community and inherited the family property, which included land in Talbot, Muskogee, and Meriwether counties. Emily died on June 18, 1911, and was buried at a cemetery in Woodland, Georgia. She was 69 years old when she died. So we're left with a mystery. Did a werewolf haunt the hills and woodland areas around Columbus, Georgia? We'll never know for sure. But what if it was true? What if? The Lizard Man of Scape-Ore Swamp is one of the most intriguing and bizarre stories of a cryptid, a creature that is not recognized by science. And it is yet another story that has emerged from the swamps of the American South. The Lizard Man is said to be a humanoid creature with green, scaly skin, red eyes, and three-fingered claws. It stands about 7 feet tall and has a muscular build. It's also very aggressive and has been known to attack cars, leaving behind scratches, dents, and even tooth marks. The first reported encounter with the Lizard Man occurred in 1988 when a 17-year-old boy named Christopher Davis claimed that he was attacked by the creature while changing a flat tire near Scape-Ore Swamp in Lee County, South Carolina. He said that he saw a large figure running towards him from the swamp, and that he managed to get into his car and drive away. But not before the Lizard Man jumped on his roof and clawed at his windshield. He showed the police the damage to his car and described the creature in detail. After Davis's story was publicized, more sightings and incidents followed. Some people claimed to have seen the Lizard Man lurking in the swamp or near their homes. Others reported finding strange footprints or hearing eerie noises at night. One couple even said that they shot at the creature with a gun, but it escaped unharmed. The Lizard Man became a sensation in the media and attracted attention of curious tourists, monster hunters, and cryptozoologists. Some people believe that the Lizard Man was a real animal, perhaps a mutated alligator, or some kind of surviving dinosaur, or other relic from prehistoric times. Others thought it was just a hoax or a legend inspired by local folklore. Still others speculated that it was an alien or a government experiment gone horribly wrong. The Lizard Man has never been captured or proven to exist, but it has left a lasting mark on the culture and history of Bishopville and Lee County. The town has hosted festivals, Comic Cons, and exhibits dedicated to the cryptid. The Lizard Man has also inspired books, documentaries, songs, and artwork by various artists. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, you have to admit that the Lizard Man of Scape-Ore Swamp is a fascinating mystery that deserves further investigation. After all, who knows what secrets lie hidden in the murky waters of the swamp? The Ozark Howler is a mysterious creature that is said to live in the remote areas of the Ozarks, a mountainous region that covers parts of Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas. The Ozark Howler is a legend that has been passed down for generations by the locals, who have heard its eerie howls and seen its frightening appearance. The origin of the Ozark Howler legend is not clear, but some sources suggest that it may have Native American roots. According to one story, the howler was a spirit animal that protected the land from invaders. Another story claims that the howler was a curse placed on the region by a witch who was burned at the stake by European settlers. Still others believe that the howler is a manifestation of the fears and hardships that the early pioneers faced in the wilderness. The first recorded sightings of the Ozark howler date back to the 1950s. But many families have stories of their ancestors encountering the creature well before that time. The legend gained more popularity in the 1990s when a cryptozoologist named Chad Arment published a book called Cryptozoology, Science and Speculation, which included a chapter on the Ozark howler. Arment claimed that he had collected dozens of eyewitness accounts and physical evidence of the creature's existence. He also speculated that the howler might be a new species of felid or canid, or a hybrid of both. In 2015, the legend received more attention when a local television station in Arkansas reported that they had received photographs of the creature from a viewer. The station contacted the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, who dismissed the photos as a hoax. However, some people still believed that the photos were genuine and that they showed proof of the howler's reality. The Ozark howler is typically described as being around the size of a bear, with a thick body, stocky legs, black shaggy hair, and prominent horns. Some witnesses also report seeing glowing red eyes, long fangs, and a long tail. The most distinctive feature of the howler is its sound, which is said to be a combination of a wolf's howl and an elk's bugle. Some people also compare it to the screams of a woman or a half-human creature. The howl is said to be very loud and terrifying and can be heard for miles. The Ozark howler is said to be nocturnal and elusive, preferring to stay in the dense forests and caves of the Ozarks. It is also said to be territorial and aggressive, especially during mating season or when protecting its young. Some stories claim that the howler can kill livestock and even humans with its powerful jaws and claws. Others say that it can cause bad luck or misfortune to those who see it or hear it. There have been many reported sightings of the Ozark howler over the years, mostly from hunters, hikers, campers, and residents who live near the woods. As one might expect, some of these sightings are simply more credible than others, but they all share some common elements. Here are some examples of notable sightings. In October 2014, a motorist in Benton County, Arkansas, reported that he nearly collided with an unidentified animal on Pump Station Road in Springdale. He described it as a bear-sized, gray, fast-running animal with horns. In December of 2015, a viewer sent photos to 4029 News in Arkansas, claiming that they showed images of the Ozark howler near Devil's Den State Park. The photos showed a dark animal with horns and red eyes hiding behind some trees. In June 2016, a group of friends camping near Lake Tenkiller in Oklahoma claimed that they heard loud howls and saw glowing eyes in the dark. They also found large paw prints and scratch marks on their car. In August 2017, a couple hiking near Branson in Missouri said that they saw a large black animal with horns crossing a road. They said it looked like a cross between a bear and a goat. In October 2018, a hunter in Texas reported that he shot and killed an animal that he believed was an Ozark howler near Big Thicket National Preserve. He said that it had black fur, horns, fangs, and red eyes. He took photos of his trophy and sent them to a local newspaper. Of course, there are many theories and opinions about what the Ozark Howler really is, or if it even exists at all. Some people believe that it's a real animal that is yet to be identified by science. Others think that it's a hoax or a misidentification of known animals. Here's some other possible explanations for the Ozark Howler. Perhaps it is a new species or subspecies of felid or canid. Some cryptozoologists suggest that the Ozark Howler might be related to big cats like cougars or lynxes, or to wolves or coyotes. They argue that these animals could have adapted to their environment and developed horns or other features over time. Maybe it's a hybrid animal. Some people propose that the Ozark Howler might be a result of crossbreeding between different animals like bears and goats or dogs and cats. They point out that hybrids can sometimes inherit traits from both parents and exhibit unusual characteristics. Alternatively, it could possibly be a known animal with mutations or deformities. Some skeptics claim that the Ozark Howler might be nothing more than an ordinary animal with genetic defects or injuries that make it look different from normal specimens. They cite examples of animals with horns or antlers growing on their heads or bodies due to tumors or infections. And of course, there are those who chalk all of this up to pranks and hoaxes. Whatever the real answer is, one would have to agree that the Ozark Howler represents a genuine mystery and a perfect subject for cryptozoological inquiry. And if you live in that region, and you should happen to hear a frightening, howling scream ripping through the night air, stay indoors. After all, better safe than sorry. On July 19, 1972, a 20-man search party was organized in the small town of Louisiana, Missouri, to track down a huge, black, hairy beast that was being reported by local residents. Louisiana's police chief Shelby Ward was afraid that nervous residents would start shooting the monster and hit a local by mistake. The media whipped up the frenzy about the monster, and the quiet, unassuming community was launched into the national spotlight. The press humorously dubbed the reportedly foul-smelling creature Momo, which stood for the Missouri Monster. But local residents found the frightening encounters anything but funny. The Missouri Monster Scare actually began on July 11, 1972. The first encounter with the creature occurred on the outskirts of Louisiana, at the base of Marzolf Hill. An 8-year-old boy named Terry Harrison and his brother Wiley, age 5, were playing with their dog in the woods at the edge of their yard. Suddenly, an older sister, Doris, 15, who was inside of the house, heard them screaming. She ran to look out of the bathroom window and saw something standing by a tree. It was 6 or 7 feet tall, black and hairy, she said. It stood like a man, but it didn't look like one to me. She began crying and ran into the other room to call her mother on the telephone. Both Doris and Terry got a good look at the monster and agreed that its face could not be seen because of the mass of hair that covered its body. The creature seemed to have no neck, and it was flecked with blood, likely from the dead dog that it was carrying under its arm. The smell of the creature was said to have been horrendous, and it may have been this odor that made the Harrisons' dog violently sick a short time after the incident. The dog's eyes grew red, and it vomited for hours afterward. At 4 p.m., Edgar Harrison, the children's father, and a deacon in the local Pentecostal church returned home from his job at the town waterworks. He found no monster, but he did find that the brush was beaten down where the children said that the creature had been standing. He also found a few faint footprints in the dust and a few black hairs scattered about. That same afternoon, a woman who lived about 3 blocks away from the Harrisons, Mrs. Clarence Lee, reported that she heard animal sounds outside her home. Not long afterwards, she allegedly spoke with a local farmer whose dog had disappeared. Remembering the Harrisons' children's report, she wondered if the monster had taken it. On July 14th, Edgar Harrison was conducting a regular prayer meeting at his home, and soon after it ended, heard clanging sounds like someone was throwing rocks into the metal water reservoir on the top of Marzoff Hill. The reservoir was an attraction for neighborhood children, but it was unlikely that any of them would have been playing there at that hour. As he listened closely to the sounds, he heard one especially loud ring and then an animal-like growl. The sound came closer and closer and was so loud that his family came running out of the house. They urged him to leave the neighborhood, but Harrison wanted to see what was making the sound. Finally, he agreed to leave, and as he drove down Allen Street, he met about 40 people, some of them carrying guns, who were on their way to investigate the sounds at the reservoir. For some reason, Harrison shouted, "Here it comes!" and the entire crowd turned away and ran. A number of people reported hearing the strange cries and screams that night, but by the time the police officers Jerry Floyd and John Whitaker arrived on the scene to investigate, they found nothing out of the ordinary. The creature continued to be seen in the days that followed, leading to Chief Ward's, quote, monster hunt on July 19th. The posse included Edgar Harrison and State Conservation Officer Gus Artis, and they covered Marzoff Hill and the surrounding area using two-way radios, but found nothing. While it was taking place, residents reported animal sounds in other parts of town. On July 20th, more investigators joined the search and again combed the area behind the Harrison house and all along Marzoff Hill. They found trampled brush, signs of digging, and large tracks that were more than 10 inches long. Handprints were found pressed into the dry, hard soil, which investigators were convinced it would have taken immense pressure to make. They also smelled the beast, believing that it was close, but saw nothing. On July 21st, the monster was seen again, this time on the Great River Road, which runs along the Mississippi River. Ellis Minor, who lived on the road, was sitting in front of his home late in the evening. It was very dark, and suddenly his bird dog began to growl. Minor switched on a powerful flashlight that he used for hunting, and he spotted the monster about 20 feet away from him, standing in the middle of the road. He later told reporters that it had hair as black as coal, and that he could not see its face because the hair on its head hung down to its chest. As soon as I threw the light on it, he recalled, it whirled and took off that way. He did not report the sighting to the police, but he did call Gus Artis, the local conservation officer. By now, national publicity was turning Louisiana into a three-ring circus. People were driving in from surrounding states, hoping to get a look at the creature. Edgar Harrison had become obsessed with finding a solution to the monster mystery. His family refused to come home again, taking up residence in a restaurant the family owned, and so his house was turned into a monster outpost. The phones rang constantly. Meanwhile, Harrison had taken a leave of absence from his job at the waterworks to hunt the monster full-time. In the company of friends and investigators, he camped out at the foot of Marzoff Hill for 21 straight nights. And while he never saw the monster, he did hear and smell it, and noted that whenever the searchers were onto something, they were overwhelmed by the terrible smell. During the last week of July and into the early days of August, more prints were found south of town. More tracks were discovered on the early morning of August 3rd at the farm of Mr. and Mrs. Bill Sutterth, who lived just northwest of town. In the middle of the night, they heard high-pitched howling in their yard and ran outside with flashlights to see what was going on. In the middle of their garden, they found 4 large prints. Sutterth quickly called his hunting buddy, Clyde Penrod, who drove over and made a plaster cast of the print. Penrod, who was an avid outdoorsman, was puzzled by the whole affair. With the tracks being 20 feet away from anything else, he couldn't understand how they could have been made. They began abruptly in the center of the garden and ended just as mysteriously. It looked as if the creature had just appeared in the center of the garden and then vanished. No tracks were found anywhere else on the property, and there was no sign that any prankster could have made them either. This was to be the last encounter with the creature, and perhaps it is fitting that the monster flap ended on such an inexplicable note. The discovery of the strange tracks at the Sutter farm ended the Momo sightings and encounters in Louisiana, and the story has become little more than a remembered curiosity in the area today. There are some, though, who are likely to never forget the summer of 1972. For those people, and for those with an interest in the unexplained, those days in July will always remain a mystery.
You don't see many wild stallions anymore. No, you don't see many wild stallions anymore. And even if he did run off 3 of your best mares, he's one of the last of a wild and very singular breed. Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
In the sweltering summer of 1969, as the world fixated on the Apollo moon landing, residents near Lake Worth, Texas encountered a terrestrial enigma that would etch itself into local folklore: the Lake Worth monster. Described as a 7-foot-tall creature, part man, part goat, with scales and long clawed fingers, this mysterious being sparked a wave of sightings and sensational headlines. On July 10, 1969, reports emerged of a creature leaping from a tree onto a man's car near Greer Island, a small landmass within Lake Worth. The startled witnesses described it as half man, half goat, covered in fur and scales. The following day, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram published an article that ignited widespread interest and trepidation. In the days that followed, numerous locals reported encounters with the creature. One account detailed the monster hurling an automobile tire at a group of people, showcasing its formidable strength. Another involved a photograph taken by Alan Plaster depicting a large, white, furry figure. Plaster later suggested it might have been a prank, noting, "Whatever it was, it wanted to be seen." The Lake Worth monster's sudden appearances led to various theories. Some speculated it was an undiscovered primate species, while others believed it to be a hoax perpetuated by local youths. In 2005, an anonymous letter to a local newspaper claimed responsibility for the tire-throwing incident, describing it as a prank involving a tinfoil mask. Despite the fleeting nature of the sightings, the legend of the Lake Worth monster has endured. Since 2009, the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge has hosted an annual Lake Worth Monster Bash each October, celebrating the creature's place in local lore. Additionally, the Fort Worth Water Department's H2O MG podcast released a 4-part series delving into the legend, reflecting the community's ongoing fascination. As a paranormal investigator, the tale of the Lake Worth monster exemplifies how a series of unexplained events can captivate and mystify a community. Whether a misunderstood creature, an elaborate prank, or a manifestation of collective imagination, the Lake Worth monster remains a compelling chapter in the annals of Texan folklore. For those intrigued by cryptids and local legends, Lake Worth stands as a testament to the enduring allure of the unknown, inviting both skepticism and wonder. For centuries, a large winged beast known as the snallygaster is said to have terrified the people of Frederick County, Maryland. The dragon-like beast is described as a half reptile and half bird living deep in the South Mountain caves. The mysterious creature is said to swoop down silently from the sky, stealing farm animals and children from unsuspecting farm folk. And to them, there's no question that this creature is real. The area was settled by German immigrants beginning in the 1730s, who called the creature the Schnellergeist, meaning quick spirit in German. The earliest folklore mixes the half-bird features with the nightmarish features of demons and ghouls. Other descriptions describe the beast as a half-reptile, half-bird, with a metallic-like beak lined with razor-sharp teeth. Sometimes it is described as having octopus-like tentacles. The earliest stories claim that this monster sucked the blood of its victims. The snallygaster has one widely known enemy called the dweyu. The dweyu is reported to be a mammalian biped with features similar to a wolf, but the stance and stature of a human. The dweyu and the snallygaster have reportedly had vicious encounters dating back to the early settlement of the Middletown Valley. For years, the snallygaster lived only on the pages of folklore until 1909, when stories of the beast began to appear in newspapers. Encounters between local residents and the winged creature in February and March 1909 described it as having enormous wings, a long pointed bill, claws like steel hooks, and an eye in the center of its forehead. Further, it was said to make screeches like a locomotive whistle. A February 1909 article claimed that a man had been seized by the winged creature, which proceeded to sink its teeth into his jugular and drain the body of blood before dropping it along a hillside. The story was carried prominently in Middletown, Maryland's Valley Register, and soon spread far and wide, so much so that the Smithsonian Institute offered a reward for the hide. U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt reportedly considered postponing an international trip to hunt the beast personally. What a story that would have been. Strangely, in many of the early articles, the flying beast seemed to be everywhere at once. In New Jersey, it was reported that its footprints were first discovered in the snow. In West Virginia, it was said that the flying beast almost caught a woman near Scrabble and was found roosting in a farmer's barn and laid an egg the size of a barrel near Sharpsburg. A man in Casstown, Ohio, wrote a letter to the Valley Register newspaper telling of a strange creature that flew over his area, making terrible screeching noises. He described it as having 2 enormous wings, a large horny head, and a tail 20 feet long. Originally, and as far as can be documented, the creature was first sighted in Maryland by a man who operated a brick-burning kiln near Cumberland. Spied near the kiln sleeping, it emitted a blood-curdling scream when it awoke and angrily flew away. It was also sighted near Hagerstown, south of Middletown, at Lover's Leap, and seen flying over the mountains between Gaplin and Burkittsville, where it was reportedly to have laid another very large egg. The last sighting in Frederick County occurred in March 1909, where 3 men fought the creature outside a railroad station for nearly an hour and a half before chasing it into the woods of Carroll County. After that, there were no more sightings of the mysterious creature for the next 23 years, at which time it once again appeared in Frederick County, Maryland. The first report said that the, quote, bird was seen just below South Mountain in Washington County. At the time, it was surmised that as the life expectancy of a snallygaster was estimated at about 20 years, the new sightings were from the offspring of the 1909 creature. The Middletown Valley Register newspaper requested that local residents who saw the creature should provide as accurate and detailed a description as possible for scientific purposes. Soon after, 2 residents reported having seen it just east of Braddock Heights, flying about 25 feet overhead, confirming the descriptions published the previous week. The last known published report of a snallygaster was perhaps the most bizarre. It was reported that the creature had died in Washington County when fumes from a moonshine still overcame it, and it fell from the sky into a 2,500-gallon vat of alcohol. According to the story, revenue agents soon arrived and destroyed both the vat and the carcass. So it seems that we're left once again with another mystery. Another series of sightings and encounters with a strange creature that, by all rights, should not exist in our world. But if you're like me, you've already made peace with the admittedly unsettling fact that monsters do live among us. In the mid to late 1800s, settlers streamed west across North America in great numbers. There were various reasons for this exodus from the east. Gold was discovered in California. Land on the frontier was cheap, if not completely free. And the belief in manifest destiny had taken root deep in the American psyche. Texas was considered a prime location for refugees from the east. The climate was good and the soil fertile. Stephen F. Austin, Green DeWitt, Martin de Leon, and other impresarios secured land grants, first from Spain, later from Mexico, parceled the property, and sold it off in large tracts to eager settlers. Once Texas had become independent from Mexico, immigration increased dramatically. One area that attracted both Anglo and Native American settlers was in East Texas, in an area that today makes up Tyler and Polk counties. The reasons these pioneers chose this area west of the Sabine River were obvious to anyone who visited. The region was rich in timber and water resources. The land was good for farming, and the forest was teeming with all types of game. It was a virtual paradise. In the summer of 1846, something altogether new was introduced to the area's settlers: fear. This fear motivated the pioneers to reject the dog-run style cabins preferred in other parts of Texas and instead construct new homes of the thickest logs that resembled miniature forts. Students of Texas history might assume the source of this fear was tension between the settlers and the Native American tribes in the area. Such was not the case, as the dominant tribe of the area, the Alabamas, were presided over by a chief called Kalita, who generally preferred a peaceful, even friendly relationship with the white settlers. Despite the friendly relationship between the area's pioneers and the Alabamas, the settlers never felt completely comfortable with their Native American neighbors, and rumors of marauding Indians from the outer edges of Kalita's kingdom spread like wildfire from time to time. Kalita presided over the Alabamas, but also acted as chief over a loose affiliation of tribes that included the Cushatas, Creeks, and Kickapoos. When such rumors surfaced, settlers would appoint a family member to serve as a watchman so that they would not be caught flat-footed by renegade Indians during the dark East Texas nights. It was during one of these times, when bands of marauding tribesmen were said to be in the area, that the legend of the Pebble Thrower of Peach Creek was born. The George Caudill family lived on Peach Creek, about a half-mile from the settlements called Peachtree Village. Having heard the rumors of roaming hostile Indians, George charged his 18-year-old son with taking the watch one hot night in August of 1846. The nervous youth began to hear movement sounds in the forest surrounding the family's cabin during the wee hours of the morning. The young Caudill could not see anything unusual in the dark woods, but continued to hear someone or something moving about. And suddenly an object of some kind struck the roof of the cabin. The teenager heard the object slowly roll down the eaves of the house and land on the sandy ground outside. Fearing this was some sort of Indian attempt to probe the cabin's defenses, the young man rushed to wake his father. Within minutes, the entire family was up and expecting the worst. A bit later, another small object struck the roof, rolled slowly down the sloped structure, and landed with a thump outside the cabin. This action was repeated multiple times throughout the night and was heard by the entire family. Mercifully, as the rays of dawn began to break through the towering trees of the East Texas forest, the activity ceased. Once it was fully daylight, the Caudles carefully stepped out of their cabin and inspected the area around the structure. The trees had long been cleared from the area immediately surrounding the home, making it impossible for anything to drop from them onto the roof. The front yard, as was the custom in those days, was kept grass and weed free and provided a sandy record of the tracks of any person or animal that visited the cabin. On that particular morning, there were no tracks of any kind. A search for the objects that struck the roof turned up nothing. The family was completely baffled. Around midday, George paid a visit to his nearest neighbors, a family by the name of Birchman. Caudle shared the story of the creepy goings-on of the previous night with his friend. Mr. Birchman replied, "That's funny. We had the same experience and about the same time. We couldn't find any tracks, but sure felt it was the Indians." The two men proceeded to the home of another neighbor, the Keys family. They too reported having endured a barrage of pebbles during the previous night. Upon further inquiry, families up and down Peach Creek reported having experienced the shenanigans of the pebble thrower at some point in the recent past. Over time, the stone throwing continued. Annoyance replaced fear among the pioneers as it became clear that whomever the pebble thrower was, he was more prankster than marauder. All assumed that some mischievous Indian was the culprit, and it was decided a visit to Chief Kalita was in order, in the hopes that he could put a stop to the disturbing incidents. Upon hearing the testimony of the settlers, Kalita seemed strangely unsurprised and more than a little amused at the plight of the homesteaders. He stated that it was highly unlikely the pebble thrower was an Indian. He acknowledged there were probably a few unsavory characters among his tribal coalition, then added, "But the Indian does not poke fun at the white man. If he likes you, he'll not do that. If he does not like you, he has a better way of letting you know than throwing pebbles on the roofs of your homes." Kalita convinced the settlers that there was nothing he could do to stop the stone thrower, but there was likely nothing of which to be afraid. While the pioneers believed Kalita's assertion that Indians were not responsible, several left with the feeling that the chief knew more about what might actually be happening than he let on. Whatever the case, the rock throwing continued. Week after week, month after month, and year after year, the assault continued on the cabins of settlers up and down Peach Creek. The pebble thrower never left tracks, and the projectiles themselves were only rarely found. The pebble thrower of Peach Creek might have been a mischievous youth of native or Anglo origin. That would be the simplest and least disturbing explanation. It is worth mentioning, however, that the heavily forested regions of East Texas, West Louisiana, Southwest Arkansas, and Southeast Oklahoma have long traditions of wild man Sasquatch encounters. 2, Bigfoot lore is rife with incidents where these North American wood apes have reportedly hurled projectiles at or near people. The most famous example is no doubt the Ape Canyon incident that allegedly took place in the remote forests of Washington in 1924. However, literally hundreds of other projectile throwing events have been documented over the years. Incidents that are eerily similar to those experienced by homesteaders along Peach Creek so long ago continue to be reported to this very day. Could the pebble thrower of Peach Creek have been a Sasquatch? Many would find such a hypothesis laughable. But as someone who has been holed up inside a cabin in a remote and heavily wooded location during such a barrage of rocks, I do not. If there's anything to the Bigfoot phenomena, the possibility should be considered. Should you ever find yourself awakened in the middle of the night by a loud impact on the roof of the cabin in which you're living or vacationing, you likely have nothing to fear other than the loss of a good night's sleep. However, I would recommend inspecting the roof of the structure the next morning. Should you find rocks resting there, you might reconsider your plans before staying a second night. After all, rocks cannot fly onto roofs, and they do not fall from trees. Driving down a dark rural road in the middle of the night, your imagination is bound to get a little wild. Spotting eyes in the bushes, conjuring figures in the shadows between trees, or even feeling like you're being watched are all understandable reactions to a spooky atmosphere. But what happens when an overactive imagination isn't enough to explain the bizarre creature staring out at you from the dark? The town of Dover, Massachusetts is a relatively quiet and peaceful community. But for 1 week in 1977, a rash of unusual creature sightings sent the local area into a flurry of confusion and curiosity. Was there a demon in their midst? The first sighting occurred on April 21st, 1977, by three 17-year-old boys who were driving through the Massachusetts area when the car's headlights illuminated it. Bill Bartlett, the driver, reported that he saw what he thought at first was a dog or a cat, but upon closer inspection, realized that it was a bizarre, unearthly-looking creature crawling along a stone wall on Farm Street. Bartlett continued to watch the creature, and he reported it to have a disproportionately large watermelon-shaped head and illuminated orange eyes like glass marbles. It had long, thin arms and legs with slender fingers, which it used to grasp onto the pavement. It was hairless and had rough, flesh-toned skin described as tan or sandpaper-like. The creature's appearance was very plain, with no nose or ears, and no mouth was seen. The witness drawings portray its head as having a skull shape, forming the contour of a circle on top with a more elliptical ending projecting down to include where the nose and mouth would be. The Dover demon was also thought to become invisible or translucent in the night. By day, it hid deep in the forests of Dover, Massachusetts. Other witnesses have claimed the creature had green eyes and seemingly smooth, chalky, gray-toned skin, 3 feet tall, and made a blood-curdling noise similar to a hawk's screech combined with a snake's hiss. But all witnesses say it had no ears, no mouth, nose, or known gender. Witnesses also agree that it stalks in the trees and waits to scare its next victim. The creature was sighted again an hour later by John Baxter, 15, and Pete Mitchell, 13, as they were walking home. He said it was bipedal and ended up running into a gully and standing next to a tree. The next day, Abby Brabham, 15, and Will Trainter, 18, claimed to have seen a similar-looking creature from Trainter's car on the side of the road. Brabham's description matched Bartlett's and Baxter's descriptions, except this time, the cryptid had illuminated green eyes. She approximated its height as about the size of a goat. Investigators attempted to shake up Mrs. Brabham by noting she said it had green eyes reflected by car headlights, while Bartlett mentioned orange eyes being reflected back to him by his automobile's lights. Nonetheless, Miss Brabham was steadfast in her description. Bartlett, Baxter, Brabham, and Trainter all drew sketches of the monstrous sight shortly after their sightings. On the piece of paper that includes Bartlett's sketch, he wrote, quote, "I, Bill Bartlett, swear on a stack of Bibles that I saw this creature." By this time, the story had attracted national attention. Many people wrote the whole thing off as a coordinated hoax, but there was no indication at the time that any of the witnesses knew what the others were reporting. Another somewhat unusual theory is that the sightings were actually of a young moose calf, which would have a similar gangly appearance and large eyes. However, there were actually no wild moose in Massachusetts at the time. William Bartlett gave an interview to the Boston Globe in 2006, reaffirming the veracity of at least his bizarre sighting. Since that week in 1977, others have also reported encounters with the Dover demon. But what was it? An extraterrestrial interloper? A bizarre denizen from another dimension? Or the product of some weird, aberrant science experiment? I believe that the witnesses saw exactly what they reported seeing. As for the rest, we may never know. I'd like to share with you a bizarre series of events. Events involving what I like to call amphibious anomalies that have shocked and terrified businessmen, farmers, and police officers, and remains one of the most intriguing cryptozoological mysteries in the United States. I refer to the intriguing case of the Loveland Frogmen. The story of these unique creatures begins in May of 1955 on a lonely stretch of road that runs along the Little Miami River in Clermont County, Ohio, just on the outskirts of a small town known as Loveland. At approximately 3:30 a.m., an unnamed businessman claimed to have witnessed 3 bipedal, quasi-reptilian entities congregating by the side of the road. The man pulled his car to the curb and observed these creatures for what he estimated to be about 3 minutes. During this time, he noticed that these strange beings stood between 3 and 4 feet tall, were covered with leathery skin, and had webbed hands and feet. Their most distinguishing characteristic, however, was their distinctly frog-like heads, which the man claimed bore deep wrinkles where hair should have been. Just as the man was about to steal away, one of the creatures suddenly held what the witness could only describe as a wand above his head. The anonymous source further claimed that sparks spewed out of the end of this device. Needless to say, he left post-haste. Thus begins the bizarre legend of the Loveland Frogmen. Now, this tale would be fascinating enough if it ended there, but the 2 most significant encounters in the case, and indeed 2 of the most significant encounters in the annals of cryptozoology, were yet to come. At about 1 a.m. on March 3, 1972, nearly 17 years after the first report, a police officer who understandably chose to remain anonymous was traveling along Riverside Road heading towards Loveland when he saw something that would forever change his life. The officer claimed that he was driving slowly due to the substantial amount of ice on the road when he saw what looked like a dog by the curb. Suddenly, the animal darted in front of the cruiser, forcing the officer to slam on the brakes in order to avoid a potential collision with the creature. Once the police cruiser came to a halt, its headlights fell upon the prone animal. At this point, the officer described something that seems literally too bizarre to be true. In the span of seconds, this crouched, frog-like creature stood on 2 legs, stared back at the policeman, then scrambled over the guardrail and scurried down the embankment, finally disappearing into the Little Miami River. The officer in question described the creature as being 3 to 4 feet tall and weighing approximately 50 to 75 pounds. He also claimed that its skin had a leathery texture and that the animal's features resembled those of a frog or lizard. Another officer investigated the scene later that evening. He saw no sign of the creature, but reported that there were distinct scratch marks on the guardrail where the animal purportedly crossed. The next sighting occurred 2 weeks later when police officer Mark Matthews had an encounter of his own. According to Matthews' report, he was driving into Loveland and he spotted what he believed to be an injured animal lying on the pavement. Matthews climbed out of his cruiser with the intention of removing the carcass from the already ice-slicked road when the creature abruptly lurched upwards into a crouched position. Taken aback by the frogman's appearance and actions, Matthews unholstered his revolver and took a shot at the creature, which then proceeded to hobble over the side of the road and step over the guardrail, all while keeping a watchful eye on the officer. Matthews' frogman matched the first officer's description down to the last detail, with the exception of a tail, which was absent in earlier reports. In the years which have followed these events, Officer Matthews has reneged somewhat on this tale. He now claims that the animal in question was nothing more than a large reptile, which likely escaped from its owner. He further insists that the only reason he shot at the creature was to help confirm a fellow officer's story, a story which was, of course, being met with predictable skepticism by their superiors. Whether or not Matthews' change of heart was inspired by ridicule or the fading memory of an event from which he was 30 years removed, the fact remains that his own testimony contradicts his later retraction. Later that same year, an anonymous farmer reported sighting 4 bizarre creatures while inspecting his fields, which were located adjacent to the Little Miami River. The farmer claimed that the eyes of the frogmen were large and circular. Their skin was a pale greenish gray, and perhaps most disturbingly, that their mouths were wide and filled with sharp teeth. Thankfully, instead of attacking the poor man, the creatures stayed true to form and made their escape back into the river, from where they have yet to be seen again. Arguably, the most intriguing aspect of this case is the apparent use of a technological device, the sparkling wand, in the earliest reported encounter with these creatures. It has led some investigators to suggest that these creatures may not just be anomalous animals, but intelligent beings, possibly from out of this world.
This is Sandy Becker saying, keep cooking with Crisco. It's all vegetable. It's digestible.
My beer is Rheingold, the dry beer. East side, west side, and up, down and down. Rheingold extra dry beer is the beer of great renown. Friendly, freshening Rheingold, always happily dry. The clean, clear taste you want in beer is in Rheingold extra dry. From Lexington to Madison and on both sides of Park, they ask for Rheingold extra dry before and after dark. From Coney to Connecticut on Flatbush Avenue, from Jersey scenes way out to Queens, they sing as millions do. My beer is Rheingold, the dry beer, friendly, freshening, and happily dry beer. Dry means clean and it's clear, dry means thirst-quenching beer. Join the millions who buy Rheingold beer, extra dry.
You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. For 5 nights in the autumn of 1903, a strange creature with bat-like wings, a horn on its forehead, and a foul smell haunted the small Iowa town of Van Meter, leaving behind footprints and terrified witnesses. At that time, the town's population was just over 400, and none of them had any idea about the terror to come. The Van Meter visitor was first sighted on September 29, 1903, by Ulysses Griffith, a local doctor. He was awakened by a bright light shining into his bedroom window. He grabbed his shotgun and went outside to investigate. He saw a large creature perched on a telephone pole, emitting a beam of light from its horn. He fired at it, but it seemed unaffected and flew away. The next night, another witness, O.V. White, a hardware store owner, had a similar encounter. He heard a noise outside his store and saw the same creature on the roof. He also shot at it, but it flew away with a loud screech. The following night, Sidney Gregg, a banker, was returning home from work when he saw the creature in an alley. It jumped on him and knocked him down. He described it as having smooth skin, large eyes, and a blunt nose. He managed to escape and ran to his house. On October 2nd, several townspeople decided to track down the creature and put an end to its reign of terror. They followed it to an old coal mine on the outskirts of town. There they discovered not one, but 2 of the creatures. One was larger than the other and seemed to be guarding it. The townspeople opened fire on them, but they retreated into the mine shaft. The next morning, the townspeople gathered at the mine entrance, expecting to see the creatures emerge, but they never did. The mine was sealed off, and the Van Meter visitor was never seen again. What was the Van Meter visitor? It was 1903, and the concept of hoax is all but ludicrous. So too, I dare say, is the suggestion of some kind of community hallucination. While no one knows for sure, some have speculated that it was a misidentified bird, bat, or pterosaur. Such theories may deserve some consideration, but in my view, under scrutiny, fall by the wayside rather quickly. Others have suggested that the antediluvian interloper was an alien or an interdimensional being. Some have even claimed that it was a manifestation of collective fear or subconscious guilt. Whatever it was, the Van Meter monster has become a proverbial fixture in the realm of Fortean studies. Perhaps more importantly, it forces us to wonder, what else might be out there lurking in the dark? Have you ever heard of the Plaid Eye? Well, if not, I'll tell you. And afterwards, you'll probably wish you'd never heard a word about it. The Plaid Eye is a malicious, ghostly black dog from the folklore of the West Indies, South Carolina, and my own home state of Georgia. Plaid Eyes wander lonely roads, sometimes restricted to their own grave sites in the shape of an animal. Most often this animal is a dog with blazing eyes. It could almost manifest as the ghost of the human it once was. A cat, a cow, or a person with no head. At other times, the spirit was invisible except for its fiery eyes, which were considered the best way to identify an animal as being a disguised plaid eye. Sometimes the spirit takes no shape at all, only a freezing, suffocating mist. Now, a plaid eye is created whenever a person dies without a proper burial or is buried carelessly, unsettling their spirit. The angry ghost of the person manifests as a malevolent, shape-shifting being that harasses the people who fail to bury it decently. At other times, it's the remnants of a person who has unfinished business on earth and wants to cause trouble, or died unjustly and wishes to avenge its own death. It wanders the place of its burial, unable to find rest, and terrorizing anyone who passes by. Unlike many black dog spirits, the plaid eye is purely malevolent, or at least vengeful. Sometimes it only seeks justice and the punishment of those who wronged it in life. But at other times, it's simply a killer. Its appearances are linked to the new moon. In some sources, only people born with a caul over their heads could see the plaid eye in its true form. Plaid eyes bent on vengeance would exclusively hunt the people that they blamed for their deaths, but others were more indiscriminate in their choice of prey. If a person encountered a plaid eye, the spirit would begin to grow to an immense size, eventually enveloping and consuming the victim. At other times, the plaid eye follows the person without doing any harm. Sometimes it would harass and torment them, driving them insane. Especially powerful plaid eyes could suck out the human soul. The plaid eye could shapeshift and grow, like I said, to an impossible size, which is how it caught its victims. The only way to stop a plaid eye was to find the corpse of the person it once was and give it a proper burial. This would cause the spirit to end its quest for vengeance and move on. At other times, the punishment of the person who killed or otherwise offended the plaid eye's living form would calm the creature. If you ever want to encounter this evil specter, and I can assure you, you don't, remember this: avoid derelict graveyards, isolated back roads, and lonely, seldom used trails or paths, especially at night. Long before he was president, even before he was a Rough Rider, Assistant Secretary of War, or Governor of New York State, Theodore Roosevelt tried his hand at ranching in the wilds of North Dakota until the blizzards of 1886 and 1887 wiped out most of his cattle herd. One of his books from these formative years, The Wilderness Hunter from 1893, contains perhaps the first widely distributed modern tale of a Bigfoot encounter with early American West pioneers. In his book, Roosevelt relays an account as told to him by an elderly frontiersman describing nightmarish events experienced during his earlier excursions into the region. These events allegedly occurred in the Bitterroot Range, spanning Idaho and Montana, likely during the early to mid-1800s, with men of such ilk as Jim Bridger, Jebediah Smith, and Liver-Eating Johnson relentlessly scouring the West for pelts. The following is Teddy Roosevelt's retelling in full. Frontiersmen are not, as a rule, apt to be superstitious. They lead lives too hard and practical, and have too little imagination in things spiritual and supernatural. I've heard but a few ghost stories while living on the frontier, and those few were of a perfectly commonplace and conventional type. But once I listened to a goblin story, which rather impressed me. A grizzled, weather-beaten old mountain hunter by the name of Bauman, who was born and had passed all his life on the frontier. He must have believed what he said, for he could hardly repress a shudder at a certain point of the tale. He was of German ancestry, and in childhood had doubtless been saturated with all kinds of ghost and goblin lore, so that many fearsome superstitions were latent in his mind. Besides, he knew well the stories told by the Indian medicine men in their winter camps of the snow walkers and the specters and the formless evil beings that haunt the forest depths and then dog and waylay the lonely wanderer who after nightfall passes through the regions where they lurk. And it may be that when overcome by the horror of the fate that befell his friend, and when oppressed by the awful dread of the unknown, he grew to attribute both at that time and still more in remembrance, weird elfin traits to what was merely some wicked and cunning wild beast. But whether this was so or not, no man can say. When the event occurred, Bauman was still a young man and was trapping with a partner among the mountains dividing the forks of the Salmon from the head of the Wisdom River. Having not much luck, he and his partner determined to go up into a particularly wild and lonely pass through which ran a small stream said to contain many beavers. The pass had an evil reputation because the year before a solitary hunter who had wandered into it was slain, seemingly by a wild beast, the half-eaten remains being afterwards found by some mining prospectors who had passed his camp only the night before. The memory of this event, however, weighed very lightly with the two trappers, who were as adventurous and hardy as others of their kind. They took to their two lean mountain ponies to the foot of the pass, where they left them in an open beaver meadow, the rocky timber-clad ground being from there onward impractical for horses. They then struck out on foot through the vast, gloomy forest, and in about 4 hours reached a little open glade where they concluded to camp as signs of game were plenty. There was still an hour or two of daylight left, and after building a brush lean-to and throwing down and opening their packs, they started upstream. The country was very dense and hard to travel through, as there was much down timber, although here and there the somber woodland was broken by small glades of mountain grass. At dusk, they again reached camp. The glade in which it was pitched was not many yards wide, the tall, close-set pines and firs rising round it like a wall. On one side was a little stream, beyond which rose the steep mountain slope, covered with the unbroken growth of evergreen forest. They were surprised to find that during their absence, something apparently, a bear, had visited camp and had rummaged about among their things, scattering the contents of their packs, and in sheer wantonness destroying their lean-to. The footprints of the beast were quite plain, but at first they paid no particular heed to them, busying themselves with rebuilding the lean-to, laying out their beds and stores, and lighting the fire. While Bauman was making ready supper, it being already dark, His companion began to examine the tracks more closely, and soon took a brand from the fire to follow them up, where the intruder had walked along a game trail after leaving the camp. When the brand flickered out, he returned and took another, repeating his inspection of the footprints very closely. Coming back to the fire, he stood by a minute or two, peering out into the darkness, and suddenly remarked, "Bauman, that bear's been walking on 2 legs." Bauman laughed at this, but his partner insisted that he was right, and upon examining the tracks with a torch, they certainly did seem to be made by but 2 paws or feet. However, it was too dark to make sure. After discussing whether the footprints could possibly be those of a human being, and coming to the conclusion that they could not be, the 2 men rolled up in their blankets and went to sleep under the lean-to. At midnight, Bauman was awakened by some noise and sat up in his blankets. As he did so, his nostrils were struck by a strong, wild beast odor, and he caught the loom of a great body in the darkness at the mouth of the lean-to. Grasping his rifle, he fired at the vague, threatening shadow, but must have missed, for immediately afterwards he heard the smashing of the underwood as the thing, whatever it was, rushed off into the impenetrable blackness of the forest and the night. After this, the men slept but little, sitting up by the rekindled fire, but they heard nothing more. In the morning, they started out to look for a few traps they had set the previous evening, and to put out new ones. By an unspoken agreement, they kept together all day and returned to camp towards evening. On nearing it, they saw, hardly to their astonishment, that the lean-to had again been torn down. The visitor of the preceding day had returned, and in wanton malice had tossed about their camp kit and bedding and destroyed the shanty. The ground was marked by its tracks, and on leaving the camp it had gone along the soft earth by the brook. The footprints were as plain as if on snow, and after a careful scrutiny of the trail, it certainly did seem as if, whatever the thing was, it had walked off on but 2 legs. The men, thoroughly uneasy, gathered a great heap of dead logs and kept up a roaring fire throughout the night, one of the others sitting on guard most of the time. About midnight, the thing came down through the forest opposite across the brook and stayed there on the hillside for nearly an hour. They could hear the branches crackle as it moved about, and several times it uttered a harsh, grating, long-drawn moan, a peculiar, sinister sound. Yet it did not venture near the fire. In the morning, the 2 trappers, after discussing the strange events of the last 36 hours, decided that they should shoulder their packs and leave the valley that afternoon. They were more ready to do this because, in spite of seeing good game sign, they had caught very little fur. However, it was necessary first to go along the line of their traps and gather them, and this they started out to do. All the morning they kept together, picking up trap after trap, each one empty. On first leaving camp, they had the disagreeable sensation of being followed. In the dense spruce thickets, they occasionally heard a branch snap after they passed, and now and then there were slight rustling noises among the small pines to one side of them. At noon, they were back within a couple of miles of camp. In the high, bright sunlight, their fear seemed absurd to the 2 armed men, accustomed as they were through the long years of lonely wandering in the wilderness to face every kind of danger from man, brute, or element. There were still 3 beaver traps to collect from a little pond in a wide ravine nearby. Bauman volunteered to gather these and bring them in, while his companion went ahead to camp and made ready the packs. On reaching the pond, Bauman found 3 beavers in the traps, one of which had been pulled loose and carried into the beaver house. He took several hours securing and preparing the beaver, and when he started homewards, he marked with some uneasiness how low the sun was getting. As he hurried toward camp, under the tall trees, the silence and desolation of the forest weighed upon him. His feet made no sound on the pine needles, and the slanting sun rays striking through among the straight trunks made a gray twilight in which objects at a distance glimmered indistinctly. There was nothing to break the gloomy stillness which, when there is no breeze, always broods over these somber primeval forests. At last he came to the edge of the little glade where the camp lay and shouted as he approached it, but got no answer. The campfire had gone out, though thin blue smoke was still curling upwards. Near it lay the packs, wrapped and arranged. At first Bauman could see nobody, nor did he receive an answer to his call. Stepping forward, he again shouted, and as he did, his eye fell onto the body of his friend, stretched beside the trunk of a great fallen spruce. Rushing towards it, the horrified trapper found that the body was still warm, but that the neck was broken, while there were 4 great fang marks at the throat. The footprints of the unknown beast creature printed deep in the soft soil told the whole story. The unfortunate man, having finished his packing, had sat down on the spruce log with his face to the fire and his back to the dense woods to wait for his companion. While thus waiting, his monstrous assailant, which must have been lurking in the woods, waited for a chance to catch one of the adventurers unprepared, came silently up from behind, walking with long, noiseless steps and seemingly still on 2 legs. Evidently unheard, it reached the man and broke his neck by wrenching his head with its forepaws while it buried its teeth in his throat. It had not eaten the body, but apparently had romped and gambled around it in uncouth, ferocious glee, occasionally rolling over it. It had then fled back into the soundless depth of the woods. Bauman, utterly unnerved and believing the creature with which he had to deal was something either half human or half devil, some great goblin beast, abandoned everything but his rifle and struck off at speed down the pass, not halting until he reached the beaver meadows where the hobbled ponies were still grazing. Mounting, he rode onwards through the night until beyond the reach of pursuit. Roosevelt was obviously so impressed by the validity of the tale as to share it along with his own reflections of life in the wilderness, apparently believing a man as tough and stoic of the character as Bauman, rendered able to hardly repress a shudder while reliving the distant memory as proof enough. Bauman makes no mention of what he thought the creature was, and Roosevelt does not call it a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch in his book, but it has hallmarks of Bigfoot stories: the foul smell, large hulking body, and the classic large tracks. Bauman was an old man when he told his tale to Roosevelt, and it must have made an impression on him to be included in his book. What do you think Bauman encountered all those years ago in the vast Montana wilderness? Based on all of the available information, I find it reasonable to assume that Bauman's unfortunate partner was killed by a Bigfoot.